how is it possible that there are people in the White House who are baffled and you and I understand exactly what's going on, right? This is not that complicated. Donald Trump wants Bill Pulte to be in that position so that he can spend a few more days or weeks undermining free and fair elections, that he can do whatever dirty work that they believe that lackey Jay Clayton won't do, right? I mean, Bill Pulte is a lackey. Jay Clayton is a lackey, right? Jay Clayton would refuse to say that Joe Biden won the election in his confirmation hearing. He went on television and cast doubt or raised questions that don't exist about the California vote counting, right? Mm-hmm. But Jay Clayton's not really a made man when it comes to the election and Irish stuff. He's not really as out there and willing to peddle in wild-eyed conspiracies and the like. And so Donald Trump wants to have Pulte in the seat until he finishes that up. It's quite dangerous. You know, we're less than 100 days from the election. So every week that goes by, it may not sound like a lot, but every week that goes by, we are getting that much closer to Election Day. And anyone, you know, who's been involved in elections, and Lord knows you were the chair of a national party and Simone was in the senior leadership of a presidential campaign. You know, the one thing you can never get back in campaigns is time.
Right. You know, one of the things I think that matters a lot is both just how the actual actions that Donald Trump has taken in order to have some shenanigans within this election because of what he believes happened in 2020, which is a lie, and then how voters feel about that. So there's a new Gallup polling that I want to share with you. Overall election concerns. 67% of voters say they are worried about their political leaders pressuring election officials to change outcomes. 57% of voters say they are worried that are worried about ballots not being properly handled, counted, or secured. But then we had Carl, the producer, dig in a little bit more on the ideological differences here. On the question of concern that you have concern that political leaders will pressure election officials to change election outcomes. 56% of Republicans have concerns, 77% of Democrats, 66% of independents. And on the question of whether or not you have concern on ballots being properly handled, counted, or secured, 66% of Republicans say they're concerned, 52% of Democrats, 54% of independents. And for me, and I think probably for everyone here, including yourself, those numbers are concerning. Democrats have a lot of reason to be concerned. They watched someone try to do a coup on January 6th. They heard Donald Trump call leaders in Georgia to ask for 11,000 plus votes. But the reason Republicans have all these concerns largely is because of lies fed by Donald Trump. And I'm curious what you think those numbers, what they do to the environment that we're all going to be voting in.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to call you out for some credit here, because, you know, I am constantly being told by all the smart people out there, oh, you know, the American people, they're not worried about this kind of stuff. Yeah. And there you are. You know, I come on your show because you guys pay attention to this every day. And, you know, kudos to you for doing so. So you're the only one I've seen so far, by the way, call out these polls. And those are extraordinary numbers. Those are extraordinary numbers. I mean, you go find me another issue where you've got 60, 70% of the American public, you know, concerned about it. Now, that said, you're right. There is a big partisan divide about like how to interpret these numbers. And what it is going to do is make the environment as we get closer to elections just that much more combustible. And I think that all of us need to be prepared to do two things. The first is not get distracted by the lies that Donald Trump is telling. We need to make sure we are registered to vote. We need to have a plan to vote. We need to vote. But the second is we need to speak with exactly the kind of moral clarity that you just did. We need to be able to say that what Donald Trump is offering his supporters are lies, that when they believe it, they are believing lies. I'm not necessarily saying they're bad people. They have been lied to, but they are still believing lies. And so we have to do both of those two things and, you know, and then be obviously prepared on the ground.
You know, the lies are what drove people to the Capitol on January 6th. And I think that one of the lessons, at least for me, from 2020, 2021, going on forward to this last election, is that the words that you use matter. We cannot assume that everybody knows what the big lie is. We have to break it down, which is why I appreciate the numbers that Eugene read and like the work that the producers did today. Let me just flip it on the other side, Mark. Yes, they are being told lies, but maybe this is controversial, but the people who are concerned that like, oh, the ballots could be handled improperly, I'm concerned about that because this is a government that went in and a couple months ago got ballots from 2020 from Fulton County, claiming that they were fraudulent. This government, this current administration. I'm concerned that they could claim, I mean, Mike Johnson, maybe people have forgot, but Mike Johnson led the amicus brief in 2020, claiming that the election was riddled with fraud and irregularities. And now he is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, saying that he is the, he's the defender and the protector and the stuff. Like, well, what is going on? I think that the people are being lied to, but also we should be very clear that there are nefarious things going on. And I'm about sick and tired of a lot of very smart people being like, oh, all folks have to do is overwhelm the ballot box. Right. What happens when they do that and then the day after, the whole Republican apparatus claims fraud?
Look, I agree with you. And I agree with you. I have been called an alarmist. I've been called, someone who is getting people worried about nothing. In 2020, I was like, look, Donald Trump is going to try to steal this election. And people were like, pipe down, you're going to suppress the vote. I'm like, I'm not trying to suppress the vote. I'm just trying to say we need to be prepared. And even after my law firm and I beat Donald Trump in court more than 60 times after the election, I was like, he is not going to concede. Like, this is going to escalate. Now, did I predict a violent insurrection on January 6th? No. But I think you are right, Simone. There is a unbelievable desire, even among well-meaning people, to just think that this is the United States and it'll all be okay. Mm-hmm. But, if I could just speak honestly to three people whose, parents and grandparents and great-grandparents were disenfranchised at the ballot box in this country, it does not automatically just work out okay. Mm. Like we are as a country have a history of disenfranchising voters who we do not want to participate in the electoral process, to deprive them the power of the vote. And yes, that was done on racially targeted grounds for the bulk of American history, And now it is being done in part based on racial grounds, but in part just based on partisan grounds. And so I call this out all the time. Donald Trump and the Republican Party are not looking to just disenfranchise all voters. Why are they doing proof of citizenship? Because it disenfranchises women more than men. Why are they looking to require passports and original birth certificates? Black Americans are less likely to have passports than white Americans. And by the way, a lot of older black men and women who are born in the segregated South may not have been born in a hospital and don't have an original birth certificate. These are not accidents. These are not flaws. These are the features of what they are pushing in these bills. That is why the Save America Act, for example, says you need state-issued ID but cannot be issued by an educational institution because they want to target college students.